Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Simon and I'm joined today by John and Mark, and we're going to have a chat about Christmas.
That's right. Christmas is just around the corner now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's nice that we're all dressed quite festively, and John, you borrowed Karen's pajamas. That's nice.
Actually, they're a gift from Karen. That's right. Actually, the memo was all of us meant to be in pajamas. I see you've stitched me up again.
Sorry, John.
That's all right.
We
That's
couldn't
all right.
quite go through with it.
Yeah, that's fine.
So tell us, Mark, what are we talking about today?
Well, I think the nub of it is Christmas makes some people nervous, doesn't it? Some people get nervous. I mean, Christians get nervous about how commercialized Christmas is. And then people get nervous for all sorts of other reasons too. I mean, it's not just if you're a pastor, you've got extra sermons to prepare, or worried you're going to burn the dinner, or forget to buy that auntie a present. We're talking about deeper worries here. Every now and again, people suggest that Christmas might not be Christian at all. That Christmas might actually be a pagan festival, a Roman ripoff that the early church kind of borrowed and took over, and that's concerning. That might mean we shouldn't celebrate Christmas. And these are the sorts of questions that we get around this time of year from our students.
All right, we'll get right into it then. Mark, a question for you. I know within early Christianity, festivals like the big three, Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, all of them took time to develop, right? Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they don't come out with a plan for how to celebrate the whole Christian year overnight. Easter is the first one to sort of be embedded. I mean, it's the feast of the death and resurrection of Jesus, right? So that one comes first. And then the second of the big three is actually Pentecost, because it kind of caps off the Easter season. You know, you have the resurrection of Jesus, and then 50 days later, you celebrate the gift of the Holy Spirit that brings the church into being. A little bit before Christmas, we have something called Epiphany, the Feast of Epiphany. That's the 6th of January. And the Feast of Epiphanies is very much connected to Christmas, still is today. It's a time where the church celebrates a few different things. One thing is the arrival of the wise men bringing gifts, and also the baptism of Jesus we celebrate on Epiphany. These things are all connected with sort of recognition of who Jesus is, the specialness of this one who has come into our midst, who's been sent to us. And a little bit later on, around the early 300s, then we start to see Christmas. We start to see 25th of December, and Christmas arrives on the scene at a time where, early 300s, the Jewish gospel is already moving into a Greek and Roman setting and laying down roots there. The Roman Empire is just beginning to embrace the gospel and embrace Christianity.
And what do you make of this idea then that Christmas is actually a pagan festival?
Every year, that's what the media will say. There'll be new news articles or YouTube clips debunking Christmas as a Christian festival. And you see that from outside the church. And quite often you hear that worry articulated inside the church as well. And really, this is an area where kind of popular culture and popular belief says one thing, but actually popular culture has not really kept up with scholarly consensus. The myths that circulate and what the best historians now think is most likely, these two things are poles apart when it comes to Christmas. It's actually not very common nowadays within scholarship to suggest that Christmas is a pagan import. It's important to remember that Christmas isn't just Christmas Day. It's actually a season. Christmas is a 12-day festival. It's not just one day. It runs for 12 days. But the 25th of December, I think, is the one that people worry about especially, that this has kind of been borrowed from the Roman world, and that it's not really Jesus' birthday.
So you're saying it's not the case that the 25th of December was Jesus' actual birthday?
I mean, it's not impossible, but probably not. So this is one place where I think the questions and concerns that people have some validity.
But wouldn't the early church have remembered Jesus' birthday. I mean, he's the Son of God. It's his birthday.
Yeah, they could have asked his mother, right?
Yeah,
Mary was
yeah.
still around. Yeah, I know what you mean. But the trouble is, not only is it the case that the birth of Jesus is the very beginning of this story, and that it's a private moment. I mean, Jesus' death and resurrection is very public, right? The matter of historic record. His birth is the very beginning of this story, and it's private, witnessed by Mary, Joseph, and some farmyard animals. So it's a very private moment. But it's not just that. It's also the case that in the first century, you have multiple calendars in use. You know, you've got the Roman calendar, you have the Egyptian calendar. So people sometimes say, well, couldn't they have just asked Jesus' mum? And yeah, they could have. But with these multiple calendars, even Mary may have struggled to pinpoint the exact date. And people actually didn't tend to try to pinpoint the exact date of a birth often in the ancient world in the first century. Because the Julian calendar, Egyptian calendar, generally people used to talk about a season or a window, not a particular date.
Right.
One of the other things in the background, though, is that in Jewish tradition, there was often this thought that a righteous man would be permitted by God to live out the fullness of each one of his years. Some people thought that Jesus would have completed each one of his earthly years before he suffered that fate. So therefore he would have been born or conceived around 12 months prior to his crucifixion. Okay?
Right.
So this is something in the background, Jewish tradition, that people would live out, righteous people would live out each of the years of their lives in full. Yeah.
So you're saying that dying on your birthday isn't just some extraordinarily bad luck?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Dying on your birthday in the first century, if you're Jewish, can signal your holiness. You know, it can signal that. One theologian, a man called Tertullian, one of the church fathers, he hypothesized that Jesus was conceived on the same day as he was crucified. So the parallel that Tertullian establishes, the day he entered the womb and the day he entered the tomb, right? And if you do the maths, 25th of December is 9 months after the 25th of March, and this was the date that Tertullian thought was around about the date of the Passover in the year that Jesus was crucified. And that's how at least one theologian in the early church got to late December as a date on which to celebrate the birth of Christ.
But I think there's more to people's worry, simply that 25th of December is not Jesus' actual birthday.
True.
I think the concern goes beyond that to stuff like whether it's actually a pagan festival and if we have co-opted pagan practices into Christmas. Could you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And again, this is an area where popular culture really has not kept up with scholarly consensus, because this is not what the historians say about the origins of Christmas nowadays. So let's unpack this a little bit. The first thing to say is the Romans, like almost all cultures in this part of the world, they do mark the winter solstice, right? And what is the winter solstice? Well, it's that time of the year when you have the most hours of darkness, the fewest hours of light, and it's the turning point where then the light begins to return. So in this part of the world, in the ancient Mediterranean, all cultures really mark that moment. And they mark the summer solstice too. And not just the ancient Mediterranean either. I mean, the Chinese, for example, have a huge winter solstice. What is it called? It's Dongzi. I'm going to massacre the pronunciation.
I think John knows the correct pronunciation.
Yes, John, you're our
I think that
consultant.
would probably break the microphone, so I'm
Okay,
going
let's
to,
not even
not
try
do
and
that.
say that right. The winter solstice follows the natural rhythm of the darkness and the return of the light. And when the celebration of the birth of Christ began to fall at this time of the year, I would imagine it was only natural for Christians who've already reading John 1, that the light shines in the darkness has not overcome it. very naturally they would have made these connections to this time of year when the natural world happened to reflect something of what the story
Yes.
was telling. And that doesn't mean it's like a co-opting of the winter solstice. It can mean that there's a contextual connection that's being made. Yeah.
But how did the Romans celebrate the solstice? And did Christians actually borrow any practices from them?
There are really two Roman festivals that we could compare with Christmas. The first one is a very old festival in December called Saturnalia, and people sometimes talk about this one.
Yes.
Saturnalia was actually a little bit like Chinese New Year in the sense that it was
Ang paos.
gift exchange
Right.
for sure.
Interesting.
But also it was the one time of year where the Romans would just stop, down tools, spend time at home, celebrate with family. So quite like Chinese New Year in that sense, you know. And also the kind of traditional social boundaries would be blurred for a little while. So like the boss would eat with his workers and all of this kind of stuff. And like I said, gifts would be exchanged. So that was Saturnalia. But again, what's important to note is, as far as we can tell, this is not a particularly religious festival at all.
Okay.
Now, of course, you know, everything is suffused with religion up to a point in the ancient Roman world. But it took place at home. You know, it wasn't like in the temple. It was in the home. It was more about stopping things than it was about doing things. And the other thing to say is that even when it grew to its largest, like full 7 days, it was over by the 19th of December. So it's not a direct fit for what we're talking about. There's no direct connection.
Interesting.
But one thing that we do see is that the adoption of Christmas did lead to the decline of Saturnalia. So some of the cultural practices, like eating with family and with friends and with workers, exchanging gifts, spending time at home, taking a break, a lot of this stuff started to move into Christmas because they were so close together. And as Christmas became more important, Saturnalia became less important in the Roman world.
That's very interesting. Okay, so that's the first Roman festival, Saturnalia. You mentioned there was a second one.
There's a second one. This one is called Sol Invictus. And this was the 25th of December. Okay, so now we have a date match. And 25th of December, coinciding with the winter solstice. And this celebration was associated with the god of the sun. In fact, Sol Invictus means the unconquered sun.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's definitely pagan, right?
It sounds a bit more pagan, doesn't it? But here's the thing. Evidence actually shows that Sol, the god of the sun, it really didn't become a big deal until the 250s AD. Right? So years after Jesus' birth, centuries after Jesus' birth. And you have this Emperor Aurelian, and he sort of adds this new feast when he builds a new temple to Sol, to the god of the sun. And then we have to wait over 100 years after that until we see intentional, widespread celebration of Sol Invictus, as late as 361. And the person who really pushes this Sol Invictus festival, 25th of December, as a celebration of the god of the sun, is a guy called Emperor Julian. Now, if you remember, Emperor Julian is also known as Julian the Apostate. He was actually the emperor that came after Constantine. So Constantine begins the journey of the Roman world embracing Christianity. But after Constantine, there came this Emperor Julian. He wanted to turn the clock back. He wanted to return to pagan practices. He wanted to scrub out the partnership with Christianity. And so, you know, in that sense, it's not surprising that he was pushing a lot of pagan festivities as he did that. And, you know, it's even possible for that reason, because it's such a late date, it's even possible that Julian actually borrowed from Christmas to establish the Sol Invictus, rather than Christians borrowing from the Roman world to establish their festival. It might actually be the other way around.
Yes.
Like it's a Christian ripoff by the Romans and not a Roman ripoff by the Christians. Yeah.
Good Uno Reverso there, Mark.
Yeah, the reverso
Uno
card.
reverse.
That's right. That's right.
Played.
But John, look, I want to turn to you next. So we talked about the kind of the origins of Christmas, I guess. But you have a book contract at the moment. You're currently writing a book on contextual theology, right?
Yes, that's right.
So how the gospel engages with culture in different parts of the world. And I think that's what we've been talking about here really, is like how did the church engage with the culture as people began to turn to Christ in the ancient world? Yes, there were some things that moved across into this celebration of Christmas, but one way to look at that is, Christmas is pagan, but another way to look at it is that's good missiology, it's redemptive theology, it's the transformation of culture. So I wonder if you look to the history of Christian reflection on this sort of thing. Are there particular theologians or figures who can help us think about these things?
The worry isn't so much that Christmas as a whole is a pagan festival, because if we look at it, it's clearly not. It's practiced by the whole Christian church across the world for many centuries now. I think the worry and the qualm is that there are pagan elements that have somehow surreptitiously sneaked into our practice. But as you mentioned, the idea that the Christian church and its historical figures have co-opted, borrowed, and baptized ideas from things that existed outside of the faith is something that is not a new thing. I mean, if we think about, if we categorize pagan festivals, pagan issues as things that are simply outside of the church, we can look as far back as, we can look further back than Augustine, but he's a great example in his sort of approach in using concepts that weren't Christian and using them to elucidate, to defend, and to explain the gospel.
So it's a theological issue then, right, of how the gospel relates to culture. Could you tell us a bit about how the early church related to this idea?
Yeah, let's stay with Augustine of Hungry Hippo, as I like to call him in my lectures. So he was a prime example of this, because not only did he take a pagan idea, but he borrowed an entire pagan system of thinking, and that was, of course, Platonism.
Right.
And he used that to explain doctrines such as the incarnation. He used it to describe the characteristics and properties of God. He used it to explain theological anthropology, that we are not just material beings, but also immaterial beings. And he had this principle that was really useful, that is still relevant to us today, and that was the idea of plundering from the Egyptians. So he uses this example from Exodus when the Israelites were leaving Egypt.
Right.
And when they left, they took the gold, the silver, the garments that the Egyptians had used in their idolatry, in their temples, and they took it and they repurposed it. What Augustine was trying to say in using this as an analogy was there are truths that are out there that can be used for the Christian faith and for its people in the church.
Okay, so you do mention something about how Christianity redeems culture.
So when we try and communicate the gospel truth to a culture, there are always two poles which we have to kind of sail in between. The first is the pole of irrelevance and being incomprehensible. A lot of the concepts and the doctrines that we talk about in theology are just rife with philosophical concepts from the Western intellectual tradition which don't make any sense. Yeah. So we have to make it couched in a language that is understandable without its technical terms and jargon. So that's the pole of irrelevance, pole of being unable to be understood is one thing that we have to avoid. But on the other side of the coin, and on the other side of the spectrum, we have to avoid falling into heterodoxy. So we want to take on and we want to explain and use analogies and stories that people can resonate with, but we must make sure we don't lapse into syncretism, which is an unhelpful amalgamation of all these local beliefs, such that what comes out is no longer recognizably Christian. We want to stay within the bounds of orthodox belief. I think a good example that, not in Asia, but predating Augustine is in the Gospel of John, which you, of course, as our resident New Testament scholar and Greek teacher, would be familiar with. In the prologue, Christ is referred to as the Word. The second person of the Trinity is the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the word there, logos, that is a loaded term. The Greeks used the word logos. I think it was Heraclitus who used it to describe an impersonal, organizing, underlying principle of reality, impersonal. And so when John uses the word logos, those in the Greek culture would have understood it to be something different. But it's baptized into the Gospel of John as meaning as meaning a personal force. The second person of the Trinity is now seen to be a logos. So this is a good example of contextualizing for the audience.
Right.
So we're quite a long way now from gift giving or eating turkey.
Yes.
But still the principle seems to be the same, right? There's a question of how words, ideas, but also practices can be taken and invested with new redemptive meaning. So even if there is some borrowing from a pre-existing festival when it comes to the celebration of Christmas, the question is borrowed how? You know, what is the product? What is the significance of the celebration as it takes shape, rather than where does it all come from originally, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. One last question. If there is something that you want people to take away from the talk today with regards to Christmas, what would it be?
I think, Simon, if we think about the incarnation as the second person of the Trinity, the Son, taking on a human flesh for the redemption of the world, that is very good news, no matter what date it is that we celebrate, and we have that in mind.
Yeah, I think really this is a time of year to reflect on the way in which God will cross any and every barrier in order to come to us. The barrier between creation and the uncreated, but also the barrier of human sin and fallenness. And so God coming right into our midst. That's what we celebrate at Christmas. That's still true today. And it's glad tidings of great joy for all people, as Luke's gospel puts it. Yeah. Great. Well, this has been a good conversation, guys. Thank you. We've got John. John has been the shepherd in this Christmas story. What I'm not sure about is which one of us is the wise man, Simon.
You can take the wise man's place.
But maybe since it's nearly Christmas, it could be time for a song. What do you think? Shall we attempt to redeem an old song? Let's give it a go.